Do you ever recommend using lymphatic creams while doing that? Different types of
Lymphatic
ones,
what?
or lymphatic creams, or
Oh,
even
sure.
some people
Yeah.
use oils, whether it's castor can help, or I've seen other
Yeah.
lymphatic ones from Europe that are kind of, made to accelerate a little bit, stimulate.
Yeah. Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. You can do those for several reasons. One, you can get a nicer glide around the
Yeah.
skin. So sometimes it's more comfortable for somebody. A
Hmm.
lot of times I don't like the creams because I have a little bit more uh, tension and pull from the
Mm.
skin. So it actually moves the lymph more because it's pulling with my hand. If I was, so it was more friction was the word I was looking for in that region. But the most important thing beyond the cream is to make sure that you do the correct order.
Yes.
That's a non-negotiable. So it has to
Yeah.
be 1 through 6, not 6 through 1, because that's based on the dynamics and the physics of how fluids move. That's one of the reasons why I don't arbitrarily just start massaging body parts that have tightness or if they have inflammation or tension, because yeah, I mean, you're always going to move blood flow, but the next question is where are you moving it to?
Right.
And how's the blood flow get to where you're rubbing? If you can't answer that question, I don't want you rubbing anything because you
Hmm.
have to open up those routes. And when you do the 6, you already did that. Like you just start there,
Yeah.
then you can go back and isolate other regions. So when I teach my lymphatic work, I always say do the 1 through 6. Then afterwards, you can go back and focus on your hands and your arms and your legs and your back, and you can massage or dry brush then. So you always go from the collarbone out, and then we go from outside in, specifically for that reason.
Hmm.
But also, I don't care what kind of cream you use. If you do it in the wrong order, it's not going to work
That's
as
right.
well.
Steps and
That's the
priorities
that's
are
the
very
only
important.
non-negotiable. Yeah, say it again.
Steps and priorities are very important. And it's not just with lymphatic drainage. I find that so much with just, if you're trying to push heavy metals by doing a bunch of chelation without open up the organs of elimination, you'll probably
Right.
do more damage. Right. So it's, again, there
Yes.
are steps to this.
Yeah. It's just that's the processes that the body has to have. It's
Yeah.
steps. That's where not. Yeah, you can understand anatomy, but it's not so much about anatomy. It's about physiology.
Mm,
That's why I study that, because anatomy are the parts. Physiology are how the parts interact with each other. That's the most important part that you need to understand. And when you know both, I mean, you're a really great clinician and a good critical thinker on being able to map things out. But I read once, I was studying neurology, and it was something called the dynamical systems theory. And because I started to study like complex systems as well, systems theory, because the body is full of complex systems that have to work with each other. They're not complicated, but they're complex. Humans make it complicated. And it said this is that what happens somewhere depends on what you did before what you just did, basically. So what that means is this is that if I'll give you an example because it's pretty cool. I'm going to pick 2 spots. I'm going to say your right shoulder, and then I'll say my left hip, right shoulder, left hip. 2 separate places, right? But they're not really separate. So if I touch the right shoulder, I've influenced what? Blood flow, fascia, but I've also influenced the human nervous system from the touch. Because now your brain acknowledges input to A, correct? And then, of course, whatever that stimulus is. Did I punch you or did I rub you? You got it?
mhm.
So here comes A. What you need to know is this: no matter where you touch second is completely dependent on what your nervous system did with the first spot, like A. So what happens with B is no longer about B, because
Right.
then I would go to B at your hip, but that is completely dependent on what A did, right?
Yes.
Now, these are the same two spots, yes? Now, let's reverse the order. What happens if I go down and I touch spot B first? Completely different outcome.
Mm.
Why? Because I'm influencing blood changes from this spot, lymph changes from this spot, which changes pressure everywhere in the body, but I'm also having a change into the nervous system of the person that I just touched by going after the left hip, which now changes completely what happens at A. So even though they're the same spots, they're not the same spots at all when you look at neurology, because neurology is input goes into the brain. The brain has to tell itself a story or a narrative about the input.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get the output. So that makes a huge difference. What happens if a person had a surgery or an injury to the left hip that I didn't know about? What happened if that person had some sexual abuse in their past and I go near the left hip B first? You can bet your bottom dollar that happens up here at A. It's going to have a big shift to that. So one, I want you to know that from a neurological perspective. But the biggest thing I want you to take away from my work is that you completely shift how fluids move in the whole body from where you touch first based on flow rates and pressure rates. And even the nervous system. Why? Because the nervous system is ultimately going to control circulation. Because if I put you into sympathetic nervous system driving, sympathetic nervous system input constricts vascular flow, chokes it off, which it's supposed to, but it's not supposed to stay there, right? So if I touch you in a place and it freaks you out, the whole system goes on lockdown. And that influences what happens next. But here's what we learned from the moral of the story. The nervous system is also impacted by what? How the lymph system and the vascular system has flowed for years as well, because your sympathetic nervous system is only going to work as well as the blood flow that gets it. Does that make sense? So when people say which came first, did the lymph or the blood or the sympathetics? Yes, they did. I don't care, because what am I going to do? I'm going to do the big six regardless.
Right.
But the reason I went through that long explanation is because that's the biggest thing that's shifted in my 30 years of practice, is not necessarily what I do, because there's a billion and one things you can do. Mm-hmm. They're all going to be dependent on where you choose to do it and what order you choose to do it in. And when you realize that, you understand a lot about how the body works. The reason it's not easy to do that is because you have to think a lot and you got to figure it out. And that's called critical thinking. Mm-hmm. But that's why when people say, Doc, I mean, what do you teach people, man? It's this. No, I teach them how to think. That's what I teach. That's my thinking process. Because when I was lying and meditating once, I was thinking to myself, that's ultimately what had to happen with me first too. I had to shift how I was thinking in order to solve my problem. And that's what I'm trying to teach people here. I'm just trying to do most of the work for you, because now all of my 30 years of being in the quicksand, hopefully you won't have to go through it, and you can just jump into doing the big six and then see how you feel, but understanding why you're doing it.
Right. And figuring that out and building that awareness in a much shorter time frame than it took you. Right.
Well, that's kind of the definition of success, right? Is, I mean, learn from people that have been where you are already. So hopefully you don't have to make the same mistakes and you can get from point A to point B a lot faster. That's what I'm trying to do for other people. Yeah. And here's the thing. I know it's going to make a difference for people when they begin to do it. I don't know how much, but I know it will shift your needle. Maybe it's just enough of a shift that you needed to grab onto that ledge so you don't feel like you want to let go anymore. And then you can You can get a foothold or a toe hold and then pull yourself up to the next one
Yeah,
and to the next one. And the next thing you know, you're finally up at the top. But when you've struggled to get to the top, you realize that that's the time that you need to turn around, look over, and lend a hand to everybody else who's still trying to get up.
absolutely.